My beloved child, there are moments when a single sentence enters a room quietly and leaves everything inside that room changed, and this was one of those moments. The third party was not expecting your family to say it. In fact, he had prepared himself for almost every possible response except the one he actually heard. He thought he understood where everyone stood. He believed he had already figured out what your family wanted, what they feared, and what they would eventually accept. Then one person from your family spoke with a calmness that made the words impossible to dismiss, and suddenly the confidence he had been carrying began to disappear. Don't skip, because the surprising part is not that he reacted strongly. The surprising part is what those words made him realize about you. For the first time, he understood that there was a piece of this story he had completely underestimated, and once that realization settled in, his entire approach began to change. He did not immediately argue. He did not immediately reveal what he was thinking. He became unusually quiet, and sometimes silence says more than an emotional reaction ever could. Something important is waiting for you, because what happened next explains why he is now planning something much bigger than anyone around him expected. The sentence from your family sounded simple on the surface, almost ordinary, yet underneath it was a message he could not ignore. You were not standing alone in this situation. Someone in your family understood more than he realized. Someone had been watching the situation carefully, noticing the small details, remembering the conversations that others had forgotten, and quietly forming an opinion about what you truly deserved. And when that opinion was finally spoken aloud, the third party realized that the story he thought he could influence was no longer moving according to his expectations. That was the moment his composure shifted. Not because your family attacked him. Not because anyone tried to embarrass him. Quite the opposite. The words were measured, respectful, almost gentle, and that gentleness made them even harder to dismiss. Your family had simply made one thing clear: whatever happened next needed to honor your feelings too. Those few words changed the atmosphere. Think about that for a moment. Sometimes people prepare themselves to resist confrontation, but they are completely unprepared for calm certainty. He could have defended himself against accusations. He could have explained himself against assumptions. But how could he argue with someone simply saying that your voice mattered? That was where everything began to turn. He looked around differently afterward. He listened differently. And beneath that controlled expression, another question was beginning to form. How much does your family already know? Stay till the end, because that question is connected to the bigger plan he is quietly putting together now. There was something else he noticed during that conversation, something so subtle that almost everyone else missed it. When your name came up, one member of your family did not hesitate. There was no uncertainty in their response. There was a quiet confidence, as though they had already understood something about your connection long before anyone had openly discussed it. The third party caught that reaction instantly. He began replaying previous moments in his mind, connecting conversations that had once seemed unrelated. A look. A change of subject. A question someone had asked weeks earlier. A strangely specific remark about the person you care about. Suddenly those details were no longer random. And this is where the situation becomes deeper, because his reaction was not simply about jealousy, disappointment, or frustration. It was about losing certainty. Until that conversation, he believed he knew where he stood. Afterward, he realized there might be conversations happening without him, feelings he had misunderstood, and decisions that could no longer be shaped simply by being the loudest presence in the room. So he stepped away carrying more questions than answers. Yet instead of disappearing from the situation, he began planning. Quietly. Carefully. Not something harmful, not something designed to create fear, but something significant enough that people close to him have already noticed a change in his behavior. He has become more deliberate. He is asking different questions. He is paying closer attention whenever your family is mentioned. Most importantly, he appears determined to understand one particular truth before making his next move. What exactly does your family know about the person you love? Because that is the part he never expected to become important. He assumed this situation existed between individuals. He did not realize that your family had been noticing the emotional undercurrent too. And perhaps you know what it feels like when people finally recognize something you have struggled to explain. There can be a strange relief in that moment. You stop feeling as though every truth must be defended. You stop carrying the entire weight of being understood. Someone else sees it. Someone else notices. Someone else quietly confirms that your feelings were never as invisible as you imagined. But there is another layer here, and this is the layer the third party cannot stop thinking about. Your family did not merely defend your right to choose. Someone apparently said something about your future that caught him completely off guard. The exact meaning of those words did not become clear immediately, because the conversation moved on almost as quickly as it arrived. Yet he remembered them. Every word. And later, when he was alone, he returned to that sentence again and again. Why would your family say that unless they knew something? Why would they sound so certain unless a deeper conversation had already happened? Why did one person exchange that particular look with another immediately afterward? That was when his original plan started changing. What he had intended to do no longer seemed sufficient. He began considering a much bigger step, something that could finally bring the hidden questions into the open. And strangely, the plan does not begin with confronting you. It does not even begin with confronting the person you love. It begins somewhere nobody expected, with another member of your family. There is a reason for that. He believes this person holds the missing piece. He believes they know why your name keeps appearing in conversations that supposedly have nothing to do with you. He believes they know what changed recently. And above everything else, he wants to know why your family suddenly seems far more certain about your future than they were before. Something important is waiting for you, because he is about to discover that the sentence which unsettled him was only the surface of what your family has been discussing. There was another conversation. A quieter one. One that happened when fewer people were present. Your name came up there too, but this time the person you love was connected directly to it. And when the third party eventually hears what was said in that conversation, he may finally understand why the room changed the instant your family spoke those few calm words. But there is one detail he still does not know, one detail that changes the meaning of everything he thinks he heard. The family member he intends to approach is already aware that he has questions, and instead of avoiding him, they appear ready to answer. The reason they are willing to speak, however, is not what he expects, because hidden inside that coming conversation is a truth about you, your family, and the person you love that has been quietly taking shape for much longer than anyone realized. The strangest part is that nobody had to warn your family member that the third party was coming with questions. Somehow, they had already sensed that this conversation was inevitable. By the time he finally approached them, his original confidence had been replaced by something quieter and far more revealing. He genuinely needed to understand what he had missed. He had replayed that earlier family conversation so many times that one sentence had begun to outweigh everything else, and yet he still could not understand why those simple words had affected him so deeply. Don't skip, because the answer was not hidden in the sentence itself. It was hidden in what your family knew before they ever said it. He began carefully, pretending his curiosity was casual, asking whether your name had been discussed recently and whether anything had changed. Your family member could have avoided the question. Instead, they paused, looked directly at him, and asked something he was completely unprepared to answer. Why does knowing how we feel about them matter so much to you? That question shifted everything. Suddenly he was no longer investigating your family was quietly reading him. For several seconds he could not find the right response, because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that this situation mattered to him far more than he had allowed anyone to see. So he tried another direction. He mentioned the person you love. And that was when the expression across from him changed. Not dramatically. Not suspiciously. Just enough. A tiny pause. A softer look. The kind of reaction that confirms there is history behind a name. He noticed immediately, and suddenly the question he had been carrying became impossible to hold back. Had the person you love already spoken to your family about you? The silence afterward answered more than words could. Something important is waiting for you, because the truth was more meaningful than he expected. There had indeed been communication, but it was not some dramatic secret arrangement. It was quieter and more personal than that. At some point, the person you love had allowed someone close to your family to understand that their feelings toward you were not casual. They had spoken carefully because they did not want to create expectations they were not prepared to honor. They did not make extravagant promises. They did not claim to know exactly what the future would bring. They simply made something clear: you had affected them deeply, and whatever happened next, they did not want your feelings treated carelessly. When the third party heard this, his entire understanding of the situation began rearranging itself. He had assumed uncertainty meant absence of feeling. He had interpreted silence as distance. He had mistaken patience for hesitation. Now he was discovering that some of the quietest moments had actually contained the greatest sincerity. And suddenly that sentence from your family made sense. They had not spoken from assumption. They had spoken from knowledge. They knew that your connection with this person carried emotional weight. They knew there had been hesitation, complications, and things still unresolved, but they also knew something the third party had never seriously considered: the person you love had been trying to handle your heart carefully even while figuring out their own. Stay till the end, because this was precisely where the third party's big plan changed. Until this conversation, he had been considering doing something that would force clarity quickly. He wanted answers. He wanted everyone to stop speaking indirectly. He wanted to understand exactly where he stood. But now he realized that forcing anything could make him look like the only person in the situation who had failed to understand what truly mattered. So instead of pushing harder, he began thinking differently. What if his next move was not about competing? What if it was about discovering the complete truth before making any decision at all? That thought surprised even him. He asked your family member one final question: is there something else I should know? The answer did not arrive immediately. Your family member looked away for a moment, as though deciding how much was appropriate to reveal, then said there was one conversation he had not heard about. One conversation that had changed how certain members of your family viewed the person you love. The third party leaned forward, expecting to hear that some grand declaration had been made. But what he heard instead was far more powerful because it was so simple. Someone had asked the person you love what they valued most about you. There were countless easy answers they could have given. Your kindness. Your presence. The way you understand them. The memories you share. But apparently they hesitated before answering, because the real answer carried more meaning than any compliment. They said that around you, they felt able to be truthful. Not impressive. Not perfect. Truthful. And those words stayed with your family. Perhaps they stay with you too, because there is something rare about being valued not merely for how happy you make someone feel, but for how safe they feel becoming more genuine around you. That was the detail the third party had never understood. He had been measuring this situation through visible actions, while your family had been noticing something underneath them. They had seen how conversations changed when your name appeared. They had noticed how the person you love became more thoughtful when discussing the future. They had noticed that even when uncertainty existed, respect remained. And slowly, the third party began understanding why his position felt different now. Nobody had pushed him away. Nobody had declared him unimportant. Reality had simply become clearer, and clarity can be uncomfortable when it challenges the story someone has been telling themselves. Yet instead of allowing that discomfort to become bitterness, something unexpected happened. He became calmer. The plan forming inside his mind changed again. It was still big, but not in the way everyone might assume. He no longer wanted to create a dramatic moment. He wanted one honest conversation, one conversation involving the person who could answer the question nobody else could answer for him. The person you love. But there was a complication. He could not simply walk up and demand clarity, because your family member had made him realize that this was not only about his questions anymore. Your feelings were part of the equation too. So he decided he would speak carefully. He would ask rather than accuse. He would listen rather than assume. And if the truth confirmed what he was beginning to suspect, he would have to make a decision of his own. This is where everything becomes unexpectedly personal, because while he was preparing for that conversation, the person you love was preparing for something too. Neither knew what the other intended. Neither knew that your family had become the invisible bridge connecting their separate decisions. And neither realized that one small detail from the past was about to enter the conversation and completely change what third party even meant in this story. There had been an earlier misunderstanding, something said about you that had traveled from one person to another until its original meaning was almost lost. The third party had believed it. The person you love had questioned it. Your family had quietly known that no one expected the third party to begin with an admission instead of a question, but when the moment finally arrived, that was exactly what happened. He sat across from the person you love carrying all the explanations he had rehearsed, all the careful questions he had prepared, and all the assumptions he had collected along the way, yet the instant your name entered the conversation, those rehearsed words suddenly felt useless. There was a long pause, the kind that makes everyone aware that whatever comes next will matter, and then he admitted something surprisingly simple: he had misunderstood you. Don't skip, because those 4 words were only the doorway. What followed changed the meaning of everything your family had noticed. He explained that for a long time, he had been hearing fragments about you from different people. Some fragments were accurate. Others were incomplete. A few had traveled through so many conversations that their meaning had changed entirely. And without realizing it, he had constructed a version of you from pieces instead of actually understanding who you were. That was why hearing your family speak with such calm certainty affected him so strongly. Their words collided with the image he had created in his own mind. If your family trusted your judgment, if they understood the connection between you and the person you love, and if they were still speaking with patience rather than concern, then perhaps the story he had believed was missing something enormous. The person you love listened without interrupting. That silence made him continue. He finally revealed the misunderstanding that had shaped his behavior. Months earlier, he had heard that you were preparing to completely distance yourself from this connection, that you no longer cared what happened, and that the person you love had already accepted it. He believed the story because it seemed to explain the silence he had witnessed. But your family knew something he did not. Your quietness had never automatically meant indifference. Sometimes people become quieter because they are protecting their peace. Sometimes they stop explaining themselves because they have explained enough. Sometimes they create space not because their feelings disappeared, but because they finally understand that genuine connection cannot be carried by one person alone. And when your family expressed that truth, the third party suddenly recognized how badly he had interpreted your silence. Something important is waiting for you, because the person you love then revealed their side. They had never believed that you stopped caring completely. They had wondered whether you were tired of uncertainty. They had wondered whether their own hesitation had made you feel unseen. And rather than chasing you with promises they were not ready to fulfill, they had chosen to become clearer about themselves first. That was why they had spoken to someone connected to your family. They were not trying to go around you. They were trying to understand whether their intentions were becoming mature enough to deserve a real conversation with you. The third party went still. Suddenly the pieces aligned. Your family's confidence. The careful conversations. The unusual patience of the person you love. The sentence that had unsettled him. None of it had been about pushing him aside. It had been about allowing something genuine to unfold without forcing it. Stay till the end. Because this was when his big plan finally came into focus, and it was nothing like what anyone expected. He had originally intended to gather everyone together and expose the contradictions he thought he had discovered. He imagined that one direct conversation would reveal who had been honest and who had not. But sitting there, hearing the complete story, he realized there was nothing meaningful to expose. There was only something to correct. So his plan transformed. Instead of creating confrontation, he wanted to bring the right people together so the misunderstanding could finally end. Not an audience. Not a dramatic gathering. Just the few people whose words had accidentally crossed and changed meaning along the way. Yet before he could explain that plan, the person you love asked him one question: why did this matter so much to you? There it was. The question your family member had already asked him. The question he had avoided once. He could not avoid it again. His expression changed, and for the first time, the person you love understood that his involvement had never been random. He had a personal reason for paying attention. Not because he wanted to control your future. Not because he wanted to decide who belonged beside you. His reason went further back. Long before the recent confusion, he had witnessed something involving you that quietly changed his opinion of you. There had been a moment when someone else was being misunderstood, and instead of joining the easiest version of the story, you had apparently chosen restraint. You did not add unnecessary words. You did not make the situation about yourself. You gave someone space to explain. The third party remembered that. Ironically, when your own situation became complicated, he failed to offer you the same fairness. That contradiction had been bothering him ever since your family spoke. Their sentence had reminded him of the person he had once seen you be, and suddenly he realized he had judged you using exactly the kind of incomplete story you once refused to use against someone else. That was why he lost his composure. It was not merely what your family said. It was what their words forced him to recognize about himself. The room softened after that admission. The person you love no longer seemed defensive. The third party no longer seemed determined to prove anything. For the first time, two people who had been standing on opposite sides of assumptions were looking at the same truth. And your name was at the center of it, not as a prize to be won, not as a decision to be made by others, but as a person whose feelings deserved to be understood directly. That realization changed the plan one final time. They agreed that nobody should speak for you. Your family could share what they had observed. The third party could correct what he had repeated. The person you love could explain their intentions. But your heart belonged to you, and whatever happened afterward needed room for your own voice. There was something quietly powerful about that agreement. For so long, this situation had been moving through conversations happening around you. Now everyone was beginning to understand that the next meaningful conversation could not happen without you. But just when it seemed the confusion had finally reached its end, the third party remembered one detail he had almost forgotten. One of the original fragments he had heard did not come from a random person. It came from someone surprisingly close to the situation. Someone who had spoken with confidence. Someone who seemed to know exactly what they were saying. If that person had been mistaken, everything could be explained easily. But if they had deliberately changed the meaning of what they heard, then there was still one unanswered question: why? The third party mentioned the name quietly. The reaction from the person you love was immediate, not anger, not fear, but unmistakable surprise. They knew this person. Your family knew this person too. And suddenly the misunderstanding no longer looked accidental. Yet even here, nobody rushed toward the darkest explanation. There could be context missing. There could be another innocent mistake buried beneath the first. So they made a decision: before bringing you into a confusing story, they would verify what had actually happened. Something important is waiting for you, because the third party knows exactly where that original conversation took place, and there was another person present who heard the words before they were repeated and changed. That person has never been asked what they remember. Until now. And when the third party quietly reached out, expecting uncertainty, the reply arrived almost immediately: yes. I remember exactly what was said. But the next sentence was the one nobody was prepared for: what you were told about them was not what I heard. And suddenly, the biggest mystery was no longer what your family had said. It was who changed the story about you, and what they were hoping would happen once everyone believed it. Why will not be about your family, the misunderstanding, or even what happened recently. He intends to begin with your name, and then explain the one thing he has been keeping quiet from everyone.